Hello friends, my name is Leigh and I create videos about photography as an art and as a lifestyle. In this video, we are talking about 50mm lenses, the nifty 50, the staple of simple all-around photography, in bright light, in low light, anywhere, anytime. But we are introducing a twist today, f1.2, an aperture restricted to conversations in hushed tones and quiet nods.
f1.8, f1.4,
Back in the day, you had your everyman 50mm f1.8 kitted out on many consumer film cameras, and the aficionado might step up to the f1.4 variant, but a select few, they would plunk down the cash for the lens that shall not be mentioned. Even today, f1.2 lenses are pretty rare, but they are so much more attainable that we can talk about them out loud. So let's do that. Today we have one vintage 50mm f1.2 lens and one shiny and new 50mm f1.2 lens that Raymond and I have spent some time with on an outing together. So we can show you the beauty of the vintage lens and how far we've come with this brand new lens. But what lenses, you ask? We have the vintage Nikon 50mm f1.2 AIS manual focus f-mount lens. We've owned this lens for a few years, having purchased it used. And we have the new 50mm f1.2 DGDN art lens for L-mount. We borrowed this lens from Sigma because, well, of course, I wanted to try out a new and compact 50mm f1.2 lens. So we took these lenses, each on a Lumix S5 II. I will explain how we used an f-mount lens on an L-mount body later on. We took them to an early summer evening at the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix, Arizona. I just mentioned that we purchased this 50mm f1.2 AIS lens used. We purchased it from KEH, who is kindly sponsoring this portion of today's video. KEH buys and sells used photography gear. We have purchased a number of items from KEH. We were using them to buy and sell our gear before we started working with them, and they've been supporting this channel for years, so we have a lot of experience with them. We've purchased vintage gear like this 50mm lens, the Nikkor 20mm f2.8 AIS lens, my beautiful Nikon FM3A film SLR, and other gear from decades past, but we've also purchased newer gear like this Lumix 70-200mm f4 L-mount lens. KEH has it all, plus so many tripods, bags, lighting, and it's all at a discount as compared to new. Check out the grading system so that you know exactly what to expect when your item arrives, and you even have a 180-day warranty just in case something slipped through the cracks and your item isn't as you expected it to be. That's never happened to me, but I like the reassurance. We've also sold thousands of dollars worth of gear to KEH because it's a quick and easy process. I have links in the description of this video for you to buy and to sell your gear, plus I have a discount code for you. Using those links is a help to this channel, as is KEH continuing to support us with these sponsorships. When thinking about an f1.2 lens, a few questions come to mind, because even though wide aperture vintage lenses can be purchased used for an absolute steal, and even though Sigma is making new f1.4 and even f1.2 lenses attainable regarding cost and availability, these very wide aperture lenses are sold at a premium compared to their slightly less wide f1.8 counterparts. Why would you spend the extra dollars? Do I really need f1.2, or is this just a number to have for bragging rights? How often would I actually be using that aperture? What do I lose at f1.2? Is it even worth it? How heavy is this thing going to be? Are there trade-offs in build quality and image quality just to get a lens that can do f1.2? To answer those questions, we wanted to have a little bit of fun. We took out our Nikon f-mount 50mm f1.2 AIS manual focus lens, which first began production in 1981, and we put it on an L-mount adapter and mounted it to one of our Lumix S5 II bodies. Next, we took the Sigma 50mm f1.2 DGDN art lens, which first began production in 2024. It's an autofocus lens, and because the version that we borrowed is L-mount, we didn't need an adapter to mount it to our second Lumix S5 II body. We'd have an old versus new, non-scientific shootout celebrating the romance of the past and what Sigma has done in the present with their aggressive aperture prime art lenses. Okay, I said we went to the Desert Botanical Garden together, and we did, but first I used this Sigma 50mm lens for a video you may have seen recently where Raymond polished up his junior high school basketball skills and potentially his junior high clothing, and we shot some action on the basketball court. I wanted to highlight this because it's an important point. I was using this lens for action photography. One thing you learn quickly about shooting with an f1.2 lens is that it helps your camera be super fast and responsive, as the autofocus engine loves the additional light that the lens brings. The Lumix S5 II doesn't have the very fastest autofocus on the market, so for action photography, I'll take all the help I can get. Plus, the ability to open up to f1.2 gives you a ton of flexibility with depth of field and with exposure, even when the light is getting dim. This means that in evening conditions, you have more leverage with wider apertures without having to resort to higher ISO settings right away. Now, with that first shoot under my belt, it was time to get Raymond out of the basketball uniform and into botanical garden mode. Raymond opted for the hybrid vintage modern setup, the aforementioned Nikon 50mm f1.2 lens, the L-mount adapter, and the Lumix S5 II. With this setup, he'd be manually focusing, and he'd have to tell the S5 II what focal length of lens he's using. There's an option for that in the menu. In this type of setup, there's no digital connection between the lens and the camera, but thanks to the short flange distance of most mirrorless cameras and inexpensive lens mount adapters, the world is your oyster when it comes to combining very different eras of photography into one slick setup. And just like with the basketball shoot, I had the S5 II with the native L-mount Sigma 50mm f1.2 art lens. With both configurations ready to go, it was time to take some pictures of flowers, cactuses, and flowers on cactuses, plus whatever else was around, because 50mm is just plain fun to shoot with. It's not too wide, it's not too narrow. What you see is what you get, which is why it is often referred to as a normal lens. And while we absolutely did not set out to do any sort of scientific testing or comparisons, we did a couple of non-scientific comparisons using the same settings on both cameras. One thing we learned right away is that the Sigma lens has some communication with the S5 II when it comes to exposure and color science. We confirmed this by briefly switching lenses between the two camera bodies. The modern Sigma lens knows what it is. It knows what the coatings are on its lens elements, and it must be altering some of the computation in the camera, as we did get slightly different looks with the two different lenses. We were able to adjust some settings to match them, and if anything, it was just a little interesting. Speaking of which, one thing that has come a long way, particularly at wide apertures, is lens corrections and sharpness and quality at those wide apertures. The Sigma is a slightly bigger lens, and there's more going on overall to help achieve digital perfection. When the Nikon lens was developed, there was no such thing as digital perfection. Everything was analog. There are 7 glass elements in the Nikon, but 17 in the Sigma. One funny thing is that even though the Sigma lens is a little bit larger, the full camera setup with the Nikon lens was actually a little bit heavier than the setup with the Sigma lens. We were curious about focusing distance. We looked it up. 40mm for the Sigma, 50mm for the Nikon. And we did take a photo at that minimum distance for each lens so that you could see the real world difference. Really though, those cursory checks weren't the purpose of this outing or this video at all. The purpose is to do what we did next. We freestyled our way through the botanical garden, capturing images and a few videos of what we encountered along the way. With a few exceptions, we didn't take the same shots because we weren't always interested in the same things. We are 2 photographers with identical camera bodies, but with lenses from entirely different generations, and each, like Raymond and I, with their own personality and style. The Nikon excelled in the manual focus film-like experience, both with the handling of the gear and the image results. The vintage lens's optics are softer at f1.2, nothing that I'd consider objectionable. And to be honest, if the images weren't quite as sharp as they are, I'd still love the lens. It just feels good to use with the damped focus ring and the aperture ring, and I adore the image characteristics of photos coming out of this lens. And one advantage with an older wide aperture lens like this is that when you do stop down to f1.4 or f1.8, where most other lenses begin, you're getting sharper images than you potentially would with those f1.4 and f1.8 prime lenses. I love what Raymond did here, celebrating that shallow depth of field that f1.2 can bring. And he was on a roll, capturing flowers, textures, some videos of flowers swaying in the breeze, and capturing the overall mindful experience of the desert botanical garden. When he captured these portraits, there was some extra time for him to get my eyes as sharp as possible, but it was not a few seconds longer than using autofocus. He used focus peaking in the camera and the manual focus assist feature, which punches in on the selected focus area in the electronic viewfinder. On my side of the equation, so nice, I've used many Sigma art lenses and I expected nothing less. Autofocus, but with a well-damped manual focus ring when you do want to shoot like it's 1981, or during those times when I'm trying to finely focus on something with a shallow depth of field and the autofocus just isn't quite getting it right. You've got the optical corrections that I mentioned earlier, the interface to the camera, you're walking around, you're getting the shot, bright light, low light, f1.2 when you want it. It's awesome. When the two quails randomly ran by, I was getting those shots. Does autofocus make that easier? It certainly does. It's also nice to have the lightweight lens be so very nimble and the option of a shallow depth of field to isolate that bird. Looking back at those questions that we asked earlier on in the video about whether we would need or want f1.2, what do we lose in an f1.2 lens, and what's the penalty in weight and flexibility? There's not much to complain about. We both shot at f1.2 generously and were pleased with the results. Neither the modern Sigma nor the vintage Nikon are particularly heavy. The build quality of both is robust and amazing. And most importantly, they're both just a delight to use. I would say that the biggest competition for an f1.2 prime lens would be a smaller and less pricey f1.8 or f2 prime lens that is slightly more compact and still has a very wide aperture. That is why you will see me often with some of these L-mount Sigma contemporary lenses that we have. Or I might adapt a compact M-mount lens to L-mount, or even a Lens Baby Velvet when the mood strikes. The important thing for all of us is that these options are out there, en masse. f1.2 is no longer an unspoken delicacy. There are vintage options, Sigma offers options, some of the camera brands are offering a few f1.2 lenses for their new mirrorless systems. It's out there and it's accessible, usually modestly priced for what they are, and ready to help you get those stunning images that you crave. What do you think? Are you an f1.2 lover? Even wider, I do have a couple of M-mount lenses that open up to f1.25 or even f1.1. Crazy pants, I know. I will link to videos where I use those in the description, as well as links to KEH and the video where I used the Sigma 50mm for action photography. And of course, I will link to both of these lenses. Please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you to KEH for continuing to support this channel, and thank you for watching.